Good evening, and welcome to What's Your Story? Tonight's episode is Stax of Soul. My guest tonight is Chris Coles. Chris is a DJ and host of Greasy Tracks, which airs on WRTC 89.3 FM on Saturdays from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. His show has been and remains a very popular broadcast for more than 20 years. Since May of 1995, he has hosted 1,920 shows. Chris is also an international journalist who worked for Reuters. He has met many famous people and covered important events all around the world. One of the more important stories that he covered was the 9/11 attacks on the Twin Towers in New York City. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Pleasure being here. Thank you for the invite.
All right, let's start at the top here, Chris. Would you please explain to our audience what Greasy Tracks is and how it came into being?
It's one of those questions that we really don't know the true answer. The program started in May of '95, and it was originally known as The Back Porch, where an old listener of mine up in Boston said, you should be doing a blues show, where I kind of envisioned somebody sitting in a rocking chair, just enjoying a little cool adult beverage, listening to good blues music. Well, that's great. Started doing that. But soul music and jazz and things like that is in my blood, so I started alternating different weeks. Blues one week and on the back porch. The alternating weekends would be Greasy Tracks. And Greasy Tracks is just what you think of. You know it by what it sounds like. You think of that down-home Southern cooking.
Yeah.
It's not exactly the healthiest stuff, but it's greasy, it's good, and it makes you feel happy.
That's right.
So that music, you know it when you hear it. You can smell it.
That's
you can see it sweat, and you can taste it. And those are Greasy Tracks.
Those are Greasy Tracks.
Yeah, and it works.
I love that.
Yeah, it works.
I love that. You're right. The food is not the best for you,
but
it's so good to you.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Absolutely. You know, Chris, I understand that you have 5,500 albums in your home. Would you please give us the names of some of the artists? I know you can't remember 5,500. Just talk to us about some of the artists.
I mean, you name it, it's in there. It's everything from A through Z and then in between. And, we go from Henry Mancini to Frank Sinatra to Parliament Funkadelic to Mandrel to the Beatles to you name it. There's just everything that's in there that you could possibly think of, and some things I even forget about that I come across.
So is it really 50? How do you know there's 5,500?
I counted them once, and there's probably more. But oddly enough, I was at a good friend's house many years ago.
Yeah.
He was having a house party, and he came down the stairs with a stack of books and records, and I'm thinking to myself, what are you doing with those? I don't have any space for those. He goes, they're yours. You lent them to me, and I'm giving you them back. So I forget about where I lend out things from time to time, and they come back to me, and it could be 5,500, it could be 5,600 for all I know.
So describe the space where you have a special man cave.
We call it the archive room.
Okay, the archive.
And it's just basically a wall of albums on shelving, and then on other walls there's CDs, there's books, there's a couple of tape decks, a few turntables, the stereo equipment in there, and it's all in there. And then a lot of historic photography, old movie posters from the Winterland, the Fillmore, some of the West Coast music halls, the Matrix, old clubs like that are on the walls, a lot of signed albums, things like that. So there's a little bit of everything, but no man cave, no nothing like that, nothing fun, just the archive room.
To what do you attribute the rebirth of the vinyl?
It's warm.
It's
warm. It sounds good. You know what I loved, and I think you could attest to this, is looking at an album cover, you had the artwork, you had liner notes, you didn't have to unfold it to look at it.
That's right.
How do you look at liner notes for an MP3?
Right.
Go figure.
Right.
Once upon a time, album artwork, whether it be photography or painting or drawing or whatever, album artwork was an important part of the whole project,
Sure.
as it was for the artists that were doing it. I mean, there was a viable need for artists and photographers to do album art. That's something that's in the past, obviously, but there was something warm and fun about, I think, vinyl, and that's why I think it's coming back. And a lot of the DJs now, the guys working in clubs and things, like the ability to manipulate sounds and things like that, and they're bringing back a lot of those old acid jazz, artists and things like that that they can mix and do things within the clubs. So I think there's something for everybody in old vinyl.
In that 55, I want to stay here for a few minutes.
Okay.
In that 5500 or 5600, would I find Sam and Dave?
By all means.
Would I find the Godfather of Soul?
By all means.
And who am I talking about?
James Brown.
James Brown.
Yep.
Would I find Ray?
Of course you'd find Ray.
I'd find Ray
Yeah,
in there.
You'd find Ray.
Or what about a fella named Otis?
Otis, by all means.
I'd find Otis in there too.
You would find Otis.
Really?
You'd find Otis on vinyl. You'd find Otis on CD. You'd find outtakes of Otis.
Really?
Yeah. And a few years ago, I had Otis's son on. We were doing a feature, and I forget what it was, but had Otis's son on, and he was talking about he was old enough that he remembers his dad.
Yes.
And Otis at the Big O Ranch. Otis would have little ponies and horses and all that, and he loved being out and doing ranch work.
Yeah.
And he loved that, getting off the road and out of the studio.
Yeah.
But he remembered his dad putting him on those ponies when he was a little boy. And it's one of those things that you never forget. It really, really fun story about Otis.
What happens to those 55 albums when you decide you've had enough?
I'll be dead before anything happens to those albums.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? They're not going anywhere?
No, they're not going anywhere. I mean, I might lend them out and things like that. I won't see them for 10 years or something, but no, they're there, and they're not going anywhere.
My goodness gracious, right?
What am I going to do with them?
How do you keep them clean?
If I take them into the studio, I'll give them a little wipe off, with a dishwasher or something like that. But they're kept, well maintained. I don't sit in there and shine them up or anything like that. But they're all in a good temperature thing. They're not in the sun. They're not getting all warped or anything like that. So they're doing what they're doing. They're waiting for the call.
So Chris, I understand from my initial interview with you that you still use turntables to do your show.
Oh, sure.
All right, talk to us about that. Now, bear in mind, there may be people watching tonight who have no idea of what a turntable is or why you would use it and what you do with it. Please tell them.
I primarily use CDs, but many times the albums are there. I'm looking for specific cuts. I'll take them in. And that's the way I learned how to do radio 30 plus years ago. It was all turntables. I remember at one of my old stations, we started getting CDs, and we had this tiny box on the wall with a lock on it. And there were 3 CDs in there. I was up at a great station up at MIT, WMBR in Cambridge. And there were 3 CDs in there with a lock on it. And we couldn't figure it out. I mean, this is MIT, high tech, really genius people. Do we flip them over? What do we do? And then it became normal to be using CDs.
Yeah.
You could put more information on that and be able to queue up things easier. But vinyl is still fun. It sounds good. And you know what? If a CD skips, there's nothing you can really do. But if vinyl skips, you stomp on the floor, you hit that table, and you can get that skip from...
It'll go on to...
Or blow on it real hard and get that little dust bunny off there. So it's user-friendly for those people who know how to use it.
Yeah. Do you have any collector albums that, are of special value?
Oh, I probably do. I don't know. I mean, there's some that are probably in there that
that are out of print?
Definitely out of print.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of some of the bands from the Bosstown era. It was supposed to be the Bosstown sound. It never really took off, like the Ultimate Spinach and Listening and the psychedelic bands. Very low quantities that our albums were printed. You look at the things like the Masked Marauders. People thought they were the Beatles with the Rolling Stones going under another name, but it wasn't. But albums from oddities and things like that. I mean, there's some rarities. There's some things that have been signed by artists, which I think are probably fetch a price. If
really?
Need be. Yeah. So there's some signature that are I think.
Do you give tours of the 55?
No, I mean, I remember years ago, Melvin Sparks, who was a dear friend in the music world, a great acid jazz guitarist who came up with George Benson under Grant Green and things like that. And Melvin and his band would come and play house parties at our house. They come up from New York City. And Melvin's guys always wanted to go into the archive room because they knew when they came to play the house, they had to play. It was not coming and just doing Mustang Sally and all the things that people would sing along with. They knew they had to come because there were music people there, and they wanted to get in and see the vinyl and look at the stuff in the archive room.
Wow.
So we don't give tours, but you know, music geeks are like anything else. They want to go and pull out the vinyl. And
so when we began this conversation, you told me that you have this stuff in your blood. It's part of your DNA. How'd that happen to a young man, as I understand it, born in Hartford Hospital? Is that right?
Yeah.
All right.
Like many others that have been born there, and then
right here in Hartford,
they
Hartford
get out.
Hospital, right?
No, I think, you know, growing up as an early teen, listening to non-commercial radio, FM radio in the 60s, the 70s, even into the early 80s, the non-commercial side of the dial, even the commercial side, there was some pretty cool stuff going on. And that captures your imagination. You know, reading was incredibly important to me. I was brought up in a household where books are very important and remain important.
Yes.
But being able to turn on that radio just kind of took you to a different place. You know, different genres of music, different hosts. There were hosts that I was listening to as a young kid that are still on the air.
Like whom?
Some of the guys over at UH Radio, guys like the great Santini, who did, you know, the Monday Evening Blues show over there. He was one of the guys on Blue Monday that I was listening to as a young kid. And they're still there. And that's kind of a thrill when you get to meet some of these people, or people that I listened to up in Boston when I was living up there, when radio was still a very, very important part of the culture of a city. You know, it was the heartbeat, where you knew what was going on based on what the FM DJs told you. They knew long before, you know, there wasn't internet and things like that, because that's where you got your news sources from, you know, when it came to music and events and things like that. You know, once a ton of bands would come to the Hartford Civic Center, they'd be at the local rock stations doing a little impromptu acoustic stuff, doing interviews after sound check. You know, those days are gone, but that brought you closer, I think, to the musicians and to cool music that you might not know about until you heard it on some of these non-commercial stations, or even the commercial stations when they were still playing stuff that was a little bit more, you know, freeform and
you know, here's something I did not know, like the Bob Steele show. Bob Steele years and years ago. But there were actually live musicians in the studio playing music during the show. Sure. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, but that's the way it was. You know, especially in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, you know, radio production was huge. Just as before television took over as the main, you know, vehicle for information. Yeah. And radio networks, you know, had big budgets for what it would be, writers, producers, musicians, as you said, because you had to keep that air chain going in between your commercials and things like
airs
that.
To death.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a whole big production. People don't understand what went into, and a lot of creativity and a lot of being quick on your feet. If something doesn't work, you gotta
improvise.
You gotta improvise. Yeah.
But throw a couple of phrases at you. Blue-eyed soul. What's that all about?
Well, I remember working in corporate America, and I sent an email around to some of the people in my department, and I said, look, I'm starting to do a show down here. It's going to be, you know, traditional blues, funk, soul, white boy blues, blue-eyed soul. Oh my God, this is when political correctness had really started to really kick in, and I got pulled into the corner office. You know, don't talk about that. You're going to be offending somebody by talking like that. But you know, you think of blue-eyed soul, you think of the Everly Brothers, and that's the guys
Righteous
I think,
Brothers,
or the Righteous Brothers,
that's who I think of.
Who really just put it on the map. And, you know, great singing.
Absolutely
amazing
great singing.
Songwriters. But, you know, the Righteous Brothers, the Everlys to a certain extent, I think they had their moments. You know, you lost that loving feeling. I mean, how can that not make the hair on the back of your neck stand up?
Absolutely.
I mean, heavy stuff. It doesn't matter when you hear that.
Absolutely.
That song could come out today and it would still chart.
Yeah, absolutely,
you know?
Absolutely.
But do I play Blue-Eyed Soul? No. I don't.
You don't really, huh?
No.
Why?
Not many ballads, nothing like that. No lovey-dovey hand-holding stuff.
Okay.
These are greasy tracks, Jim. They're greasy tracks.
That's right. Okay.
I mean, there are occasions, you know, when we do, you know, heavy-duty Stax stuff, we always end with Otis's. I've just forgotten what was so epic at Monterey Pop. Try a Little Tenderness, which wasn't even one of his songs. That was a cover that he did. But that still, with the marquee horns behind it, Booker T and the MGs, that is one.
That's when he brought the house down.
Yeah, just powerful, powerful stuff. But
Tell the people about Monterey. We got young people watching who may not know anything about that.
Yeah, I think Monterey, and you know, obviously this was the 50th anniversary of Monterey this year, 1967. That's where Jimi Hendrix truly made his U.S. debut as a leader of a band, the band of, the Experience. But at the same time, it was where Otis Redding truly blew people away. It was a show that he was off the quote-unquote Chitlin circle. He was playing for predominantly white, you know, above average income audience.
Over,
yeah, at this point, but this was a whole new audience for him. I mean, granted, they loved him over in Europe, but Monterey was the place where he leveled everybody. The power of his voice, the band that he had together, you know, Booker T and the MGs, one of the greatest studio bands of all time.
Did he play with the Bar-Kays too?
He played with the Bar-Kays later, but he had the Marquee Horns with him, who would later become the Memphis Horns. So he had the Marquee Horns, and he had Booker T and the MGs on stage with him, and just absolutely powerhouse. You know, played probably 35, 40 minutes, and that was the set.
Now, I understand that you had an opportunity to do a show down in Memphis.
Right.
All right, tell us about that. You went down there with someone else, didn't you?
Yeah, my good friend Tom Shaker from WICN up in Worcester. He does a fantastic Monday evening jazz show, and we started doing a 6 or 7 hour Stax show at RTC. Probably around 2010. And 2013, we were invited down to the Stax Museum of American Soul Music in Memphis.
Talk a little bit about the Stax Museum, because people don't know what that is. Yes.
This is really a recreation of the old theater where Satellite Records, which became Stax Records, Jim Stewart and Estelle Axton, the brother-sister who formed the label, really set up this enterprise. It was a record shop to start with, and then it became a recording studio right next door to them. And the interesting thing about this place is they've pretty much recreated a lot of the way it was back then, the recording studio. They have Isaac Hayes' gold-plated Cadillac there.
Yes, when I was there.
You know, all kinds of singles on the walls, instruments, things like that. Just an amazing collection.
The Motown of the South, is that fair?
Oh, exactly. I think it's fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I think Motown wishes they could have been doing some of the things that they were doing down there. It was interesting. You had, you know, a lot of things happening in Philly, Motown, obviously, but you know, Memphis was kind of a backwater at that time. Obviously, Johnny Cash at Sun and all that very amazing stuff that was done there. You had Ardent Records, you had Royal Studios, American Studios, where some of the greatest session players were. But Stax was, for a very short period of time, absolutely killing it across the boards with so many great singers and musicians. But you look at the likes of Sam and Dave,
Carla Thomas,
Rufus Thomas, Albert King, Eddie
Isaac Hayes.
Floyd, Isaac Hayes, who with David Porter were writing all of that stuff that Sam and Dave were knocking people out with. And then later, Isaac would essentially save that label when it was in financial freefall. The albums like Hot Buttered Soul, Black Moses, things like that. Incredibly big productions, and Isaac really becoming a solo artist unto himself.
Wow.
And the invitation to go down there and do a broadcast from there was an honor. It was a thrill. We developed a good relationship with the people at the museum, had many of them on, you know, the show in the past, and so many of the musicians. I think we've had 20, 30, 40 different people that have come through Stax at some point, either as performers, writers, management types, engineers that have been through there through the early days. So having them part of the program was great. And then go down there and meet a lot of these people face to face. Their names are still on my cell phone, and you can call them at any time, and it's like a long lost, you know, friend that you're talking to.
Now, you met Muhammad Ali, Ted Williams, and Pele, is that correct?
Yeah, it wasn't so much that I met them, but when in my writer days, these were some of the people that I covered, one-off events, appearances or things like that. So getting to be in their midst, you're looking at iconic people from history, not just in sports, but in history. I mean, the champ crosses everything, sports, society, everything. Everybody knows Muhammad Ali. Ted Williams, the last guy to hit 400, an amazing, amazing athlete, and still the pride of Boston many years later.
And Pele.
And Pele, who is renowned the world over for his exploits with the Brazilian national team and Santos, his club. So, I got to deal with Pele a few times when I was covering World Cups and things like that. And Pele's a showman. He's a PR guy. He's always doing things. But third time I think that I was around him, he called me over and he goes, "I remember you from, Boston or whatever," and big hug, So he has his showman side, but there's still a human side.
Absolutely.
And, let's face it, Pele, everybody wants a piece of Pele, historically speaking. But it was still nice that he'd give you the time of day.
So, Chris, why do you do this?
The radio?
Yeah, why do you do it, Chris?
Because
what keeps you coming back with those stacks?
I got no life. It's the only place where nobody can find me for a few hours.
You can escape.
I think it's the fun of having that blank canvas to work on each week. Nothing is pre-prepared when I go in there. This isn't a pre-recorded program. Some people will do that. They'll pre-record everything. They'll have their playlists already printed out. I don't know what I'm going to play after my first tune. I know what I'm starting with each week, but after that, it could be going anywhere. If it's somebody's birthday, that's great. It makes it easy. If somebody's just passed, that's great. It makes it easy, because I can do a feature. But to start intertwining things, getting requests from people, having a theme, whatever, or some big specials, doing a multi-week feature on somebody, or even a month-long feature on somebody, makes it fun. And not having any constraints saying you can't do this or you can only do this, don't do that, don't do this, and definitely don't do that. No. Show some taste. If you can entertain people but educate them and have fun yourself, what would I want to be listening to if I was listening to the radio right now is the way I kind of think about it. And there might be some stuff I pull out of the archive room that I haven't touched in years or decades. Sometimes like, wow, that would be fun. I'll slip it in here. I might be taking a shower and get an idea. I might be working on something and get an idea, or even on my way over, somebody calls and say, hey, what about this or this? So things change all the time, and that's kind of fun. But it's 2 hours of freedom to do what you want, forget about what's going on in the outside world, and enjoy yourself.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight's show. My thanks to my guest, Chris, for sharing his story. Thank you for tuning in. Our stories are as different as each snowflake and are as beautiful and numerous as the stars. Everybody has a story. What's yours? Until next time, good night.